The Israeli-Palestinian peace process was meant to come to an end in April, but the parties do not appear close to reaching an agreement. What are the key obstacles blocking a path to peace in the Middle East? Joining us now for their perspectives, Deanna Boutou. She is a Canadian human rights lawyer and former peace negotiator for the Palestine Liberation Organization, and Emmanuel Adler. He is the Andrea and Charles Bronfman Chair of Israeli Studies at the University of Toronto, and we're happy to have both of you here in our studios.
Thank you.
Boy, I sat around and I thought a lot about this one. I got to tell, who am I going to ask the first question to? And I thought, the only way to do it is to flip a coin, because if you ask you first, then the other anyway.
I was wondering.
So you were wondering too. So heads, you get the first question.
Great.
Tails, you get the first question. Here we go, and it is a head.
Okay.
So you're getting the first question there, Deanna, and that is, what's the current status in the negotiations as far as you know?
The current status is that they've gotten nowhere since the launch of the negotiations at the end of July, of 2013. They still haven't even agreed about what it is that they're going to talk about at this point in time. So it doesn't look as though there's going to be any framework or any agreement, for that matter, reached at the end of April of 2014, which is what the U.S. administration said that there was going to be.
Emmanuel, would you concur with that characterization?
Mostly, yes, I would concur. I just would add that, but it seems that both sides would like to keep negotiating. Right now, actually, they are situating themselves to try to blame the other. But at the same time, they would like this not to cease, for all kinds of bargaining reasons and political reasons. But I do agree with the essential point that the negotiations has not gone deep enough to really matter.
I don't have to tell either of you, these have started and stopped numerous times over numerous years. What consistently causes them to fail, in your view?
Steve, these negotiations have gone on now for 21 years, and the reason that they are failing is for two main reasons. One is that Israel doesn't recognize the applicability of international law. And the second main reason is because the United States and the international community have never forced Israel to recognize the applicability of international law. What this means is that you're going into a negotiation without any framework, without any terms of reference, and it ends up being a question of which party is stronger, who has the power. And the problem is that all the while, Palestinians are still living under Israeli military rule. So there needs to be a framework. There needs to be international law applied, just as it has been applied in other conflicts around the world. And there needs to be an honest broker, not the United States, which is consistently on the side of Israel. Those are the two things that have been missing throughout all of these negotiations. And if they don't come to play, we're going to see these negotiations continue for yet another 21 years, with more settlements going up and more Palestinians losing their lives and more Palestinian land loss.
What would you attribute the failure of the talks to for 2 decades?
Well, I think they never got even close to the minimum position of the other side, where the other side can agree. Second, they have been mainly about bargaining and not reconciliation. Even at the height of the Oslo process, behaviorally, they look the same, reconciliation or bargaining, but they were actually bargaining. Israel was creating more settlements and more facts in the ground, and Palestinians were blowing up in bases and bases in Israel. But I think, I'll leave international law for a second, because international law is important, but I think that this is a conflict of 100 years. And in order to be able to move forward and get to that point of reconciliation, it never got there, I repeat. There are many obstacles that need to be overcome. One certainly are the settlements, because the settlements in large part were put there, not only, there are people who believe that, for messianic reasons, that's why they are there, but that's one of the main issues that prevent a settlement in terms of...
Do you agree they're a blockade to peace at the moment?
I agree that obviously, because they, if there will be a two-state solution, which is my preferred solution, and actually I could even say more, because of demographic reasons and other reasons, I don't think I have the time to begin talking about them. It is not only in Palestinian interest, and she would talk about Palestinian interests better than I can, for us Israelis to get out of the territories, because in terms of one of the standing blocks right now in the present negotiations, the Jewish state issue. For me, the Jewish state is a matter of not talk but facts.
Okay, well, hold that thought, because we'll get to that in a second. You mentioned the honest broker, and that you don't believe the United States is the honest broker anymore. It's interesting, because if you polled Israelis, probably 97% would say Barack Obama is in the tank for the other side. They don't think Obama is pro-Israel. Obviously, we understand Palestinians do. If it's not America, who's the honest broker who could get this done?
It's not a question of who is going to get it done. It's a question of whether they're actually going to implement and uphold international law. And there is the ability to have other parties involved. In fact, they put together the quartet. The quartet consists of the EU, the US, Russia, and the United Nations. And that body has largely been also coming under the U.S. thumb. So the question is not who it is, but what it is that they're doing. And leaving it simply to the United States has always said that they're going to back Israel and always stand on the side of Israel. It makes it clear that they're not the honest broker. We need somebody who's going to be a law enforcer.
For example?
For example, it could be the European Union. It could be a combination of the European Union as well as the United Nations. There are many, many examples that are out there.
Does America have too strong an interest in the region to give up that role?
Yes, it plays not only too strong of an interest in the region itself, but also for domestic reasons, that it has failed in its role as being a superpower. Sometimes
negotiations fail because of the players involved, and sometimes it's just a bad process. The process is flawed. Since there have been so many starts and failures, let's take the players out of it for a second. Is this just the wrong process, Emmanuel? What do you think?
I think that, you didn't mention one other thing, which is structure. There are structural reasons, and this is what I was pointing before, and I just mentioned to start with the settlements. But at the same time, it's 1948. It's Nakba. So we are dealing...
The catastrophe.
The catastrophe. And we are dealing here with a situation in which the two sides have completely different narratives of the same reality. Yeah. And people who, in the peace camps on both sides have sat together, tried to bring these two narratives together, and they couldn't. They just raised their hand. Because the way the two sides identify reality. This is structure. This is not just, if I may, I don't object with you, but just, even before we get to the level of talking about who will be an honest broker or this law or that, there are these deep issues, that needs to be addressed. I can bring another one if I have just another minute. It's the way we think about time. As long as both sides will think that time is in their side, we cannot get there. We will continue to have the kind of negotiations that we see now in Washington and back in Israel-Palestine, and it's just bargaining because each side is thinking, time is in my side.
Meaning, Deanna, each side thinks if they just wait long enough, they can outlast the other and eventually prevail?
I don't think that the Palestinians see that at all. Steve, one of the main problems is this cancer called settlements that is continuing to take over the West Bank, and the fact that there's a siege on the Gaza Strip. So Palestinians don't see that time is on their side. They actually see that time is working against them. The longer the negotiations go on, the more settlements go up. In fact, just from 1993, where there were fewer than 200,000 settlers, to now, 2014, 21 years later, where you've got more than 550,000 settlers, maybe even as high as 600,000 settlers. So time is not working on Palestine's side or Palestinian side, and it's rather the imperative to end this now. Now, getting back to whether it's a question of process or structure, etc., one of the main things is the process itself. To have a very weak party, the Palestinians, negotiating with a very powerful party, the Israelis, is absolutely absurd. We've seen that it hasn't worked for 21 years, and I'm not sure why the international community keeps on pushing this same line of negotiations, more negotiations, and more negotiations, when what they should be doing is upholding international law, getting the settlers and the settlements out there, allowing Palestinian refugees to return to their homes, and finally ending this.
How would you do that? That's a pretty tall order.
I don't think it is a tall order. The United States, when it came to Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, they very quickly passed a number of resolutions demanding that Iraq get out of Kuwait. Similar thing can be done when it comes to Israel, to demand that the settlers actually leave and make sure that Israel takes its army with it.
But
these things are possible.
Well, using the example you just gave, it became possible because the United States decided to invade.
Precisely.
So is that the solution here? The United States has to invade Israel to get the settlers out?
No, but there definitely needs to be more sticks rather than carrots that are involved here. And what Israel has been shown over the course of the past decade, 4 decades, 47 years of military occupation is they've just been given carrots and they've never been given sticks. So what they should be doing instead is not just simply passing UN resolutions, but escalating it and demanding that Israel get out and cutting all U.S. aid to Israel to make sure that it gets out.
How about that?
Well, I think that especially when we look at it from the present time, it's going to be very, very difficult to get international, let's say the international community to impose a settlement. If there was a time, and by the way, the left in Israel is something that has talked about because of sort of they raise their hands, there is nothing else to do, so let the international community help us and have a two-state solution. Right now, first of all, at least the United States appear quite weak. International organizations are not very strong either, and there is I'm not going to get into the European Union, which is in quite a frail situation. So I cannot see an international intervention actually achieving the goal. Moreover, I'm concerned. And this is only when I look at from the Israeli side. I don't know what would happen from the Palestinian side when somebody comes from the outside and says, these are the conditions, and it starts up tomorrow, and you have to do this and you have to do this. I'm concerned that something like that will empower the extremists in my country.
And what would that portend?
It will portend to a type of attitudes that actually are being held in the last years, but would be strengthened because when you are, as it were, attacked from the outside, people go around the flag, in which some of the more extreme positions about not retreating from the territories, not withstanding pressures. We saw some statements by the Minister of Defense a few days ago that were in that kind of direction, sensing some pressure. I go back to the point where I started. I think that outside help is important. We'll need it. I think that international law is important, but also the international legal order. It's still. I mean, there are things, for example, practices that are changing in the ground. Asymmetrical warfare, where the legal order is still not caught up. Like
anything you want to refer to there?
Well, I think that what he's talking about in terms of the Israelis becoming a little bit more extremist is something that we're already seeing now, which is these calls for the expulsion of Palestinians who are citizens of the State of Israel. And this is even the Israeli foreign minister has made these claims, and the person who is now leading the second largest party in Israel is also making these assertions as well. So I think that what is needed is more of the sticks. And whether it's the sticks in terms of economic sanctions that are coming from different countries, or individuals who are deciding to boycott Israel, who are pulling their money out of Israel, and who are sanctioning Israel for all of their illegal behavior, I think that this is the only way to move forward. Otherwise, what we've done for all of these years is simply coddle Israel and coddle the settler movement in Israel, which has been allowed to run amok for all of these years.
Is there illegal behavior on both sides?
In terms of?
You have referred to illegal behavior on the Israeli side. I'm wondering if there's illegal behavior on the other side.
Well, the Palestinians are living under military occupation. And so, given that they're living under military occupation, it's actually the Israelis who are supposed to be protecting the Palestinians, not the other way around.
Let's take Palestinians living in Gaza, for example.
also living under Israeli military occupation. The fact that they're yes, absolutely, under international law, they're still living under Israeli military occupation.
The Israelis left.
The Israelis left. They pulled out their settlements, but they're still controlling it. You can't get an airplane into Gaza. You can't get a boat into Gaza. All of the land crossings are controlled by Israel, the ones that want to get into Israel. So they're still living under Israeli military occupation.
Yossi Klein Halevi was here recently, the Israeli, I guess, intellectual, author, and he said if peace is ever going to have a chance, both sides have to give until it hurts. You've got to be, as an Israeli, prepared to say, I may have a biblical claim to what they would call Judea and Samaria, but I'm going to give it up in the interests of peace, and we've had that claim for 3,000 years, but peace is more important, so even though our patriarchs are buried there, we're going to give that up. And similarly, Arabs would have to give up their claim to the orange farm that they once had 100 years ago outside Tel Aviv, for example. Is that possible? You first.
I still think I'm possible. I'm very pessimistic, but I'm possible. I think that...
You think it is possible?
It is. It is possible. It's getting more and more difficult to the point that, you know, I may lose whatever bit of optimism I have left, but there are certain conditions that need to be met, and I go back to some of them that needs to be addressed in order to start a process of reconciliation. And I go back to 1948, because the question, it's, you know, there are issues about, you know, legal issues and human rights issues, but the question is whether we are going to have a one-state solution or a two-state solution. To me, it's still very, very important. In 30, 40, 50 years, maybe we'll have a confederation and the whole world will look different.
But for now, we got to figure that out.
For now, we have to...
Okay, hold that thought for a second. How about the issue of you got to give till it hurts?
Well, Steve, Palestinians have given. They gave up a claim to 78% of their territory in 1993 on the condition that Israel simply give up 22% of the area that is illegally occupied. So they have given until it hurts. But I want to take it a step further. Why is it that Palestinians have to give up their rights in order for Israel to give up its wrongs? The settlements that they've been building are illegal, and they're illegal under international law. So why is it that Palestinians have to give up their right to return in order to undo something that Israel's been doing illegally and that is wrong? Now, getting to the future, I think that we are past the point of a two-state solution. I actually believe that what is best for this place now is for there to be one state. It's been proven that you cannot successfully divide this territory. It's never been the case where you've been able to successfully divide it in history. And so I think that what we should be doing instead is to talk about reconciliation, talk about coming together, and talk about having equal rights for the people who are living in that country.
This gets to one of the key questions, obviously, which is Jewish Israelis want Israel to be a Jewish state, which it won't be if it's a one-state solution.
But see,
so
Steve,
is that a non-starter?
No, Steve, the problem is that Israel hasn't even defined what a Jewish state actually means. The only thing that we know that a Jewish state means is that we know that it doesn't mean equality. How do we know that? So far in Israel, there are 50 laws that directly discriminate against their very own citizens based on whether they're Jewish or not Jewish. The other reason that we know that it doesn't mean equality is because there have been many attempts by members of Knesset, maybe members of the parliament, to pass legislation that demands equality for all of its citizens, and they've never managed to pass that legislation. Instead, what Jewish state means is that they have the right to discriminate against people who are not Jewish. And that is something that Palestinians find repugnant, and everybody around the world should also find repugnant.
Why does Israel...
In fact, I want to address Diana directly, because let's say that, and sorry about the, let's say that I'm the Prime Minister of Israel, and I'm informing you, the delegate of the Palestinians, that today I'm willing to give up the territories. It will hurt. It may cause a civil war, but I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to part Jerusalem more or less along the Clinton plan. I'm willing to do all kinds of other arrangements. I'm willing also to say not that we were responsible for 1948, because we did bad things. You did too. But I'm willing to say I'm sorry, and I want the other side to say it as well. And I'm willing to do all that, but I'm also, but I want then to hear from the other side, you Jews right now have a state that is called Israel. Within the 67 borders, you are 79%, okay? So as long as you are a majority, and that's the Jewish state thing, as long as we have 79, 78 a majority, and as long we treat our minorities fairly, then we have, and I even don't want to use the word right, that we are there for our self-determination, like you are there and you have to express your self-determination in the rest of the land. If possible, to get then, you know, in friendship, that will take probably many years. But a two-state solution is still possible. But we have to address, you know, the main quid pro quo is that if we go back to 67 and we say the right things that we need to say, and we divide Jerusalem the way, you know, East Jerusalem, West Jerusalem, we find a solution for Haram al-Sharif and the Temple Mount. What we want to hear, it's not necessary we recognize the Jewish state. What we want to hear, yes, we understand that Israel, within those boundaries, as long as it has a majority, it can express its culture, its self-determination, its
okay, let's
language.
Get a response on that.
Well, I'm going to take it apart just a little bit. I mean, first and foremost is that what I never hear from Israelis is this idea of equality. Even Emmanuel, when you were describing what your perfect two-state solution is, there isn't a single utterance of we will completely withdraw from each and every single inch that we have occupied since 1967, including the Ariel settlement, including Ma'ale Adumim, including all of the settlements in East Jerusalem. There's never this concept that Palestinians are entitled to equality. It is, we have done something that is wrong, and then now you Palestinians have to redraw your boundaries in order to accommodate our wrong. But more than that, in terms of getting to the issue of what goes on inside Israel, 22% of the population inside Israel is not Jewish. And they are interconnected between the same people that are in the West Bank and the same people that are in Gaza. Simply this idea of holding on to a Jewish majority, and what lengths will they go to hold on to a Jewish majority? What they're trying to do is they're saying that there's an issue of holding on to Israel, but what they are ignoring is the fact that Israel was created at the expense and on the backs of Palestinians. It is that fundamental issue that needs to be addressed, which is 1948 and what happened with the Palestinians who were expelled in 1948. To try to ignore it and simply say, well, now we're going to hold on to a Jewish majority, seems to imply that there was always a Jewish majority in the country when there wasn't. The only way it became a Jewish majority was by the expulsion of the Palestinians, and this is the issue we need to get to.
Again, everybody's heard all these arguments for a long time, and I guess the other side would argue there were no such thing as Palestinian Arabs back in the day. They didn't see themselves as Palestinians.
There's no such thing as Israel either.
Okay, so we don't. This is what I always find fascinating about this conversation is that everybody knows there's the finish line right there.
But do we really?
Well, here's the argument, and you can tell me. We know what the finish line looks like, right? It's some kind of international recognition of Israel. It's some kind of giving back of the occupied territories that Israel currently has that need to be part of a future Palestinian state. It's the Palestinians needing to give up on their dream of returning to the orange grove in Tel Aviv. That law of return is that there has to be some water in the wine there. I mean, every people in the middle, not at the extremes, but people in the middle seem to have a good sense of what the solution looks like. You just can't get there. How do you get there?
Well, I think first and foremost, the idea that somehow Palestinians have to give up their right of return.
And everybody's got to give up something, right?
We've already given up a lot. We've already given up a lot and been expelled all throughout the period of more than 6 decades. So there has been already people who've
there's
given
no
up
question
a lot.
that is the Palestinian narrative. The Israeli narrative is we're the most hated minority in the history of the world. We've been expelled from every single country we've been to. We got to have one tiny little place on earth the size of Algonquin Park that that we can be in charge of. That's the Israeli narrative.
And so Palestinians get 22% of the size of Algonquin Park.
Emmanuel?
First of all, you took a legal position from the beginning, and there are all kinds of UN decisions, international decisions that within the 67 borders recognize the legitimacy of the State of Israel. Let's start from that. But second, I want you to feel justice. But I want that your justice will include me. And what you just have said is that it doesn't. When you are talking about a one-state solution, you are not recognizing that we are there.
It's quite the opposite. I am recognizing that you're there.
No, because
She's recognizing you're there, but not as a majority entitled to rule the roost.
Right, but if we do, and this is why, and here of course, I'm not taking the same position that my leaders right now. I think we have to get out of the territories and be within more or less. I'll leave this to the negotiators within the 67 lines. We are going to be a huge majority. We are almost 80%, and there are, by the way, to answer your question, there are other countries that have large minorities. The question is, how fair are minorities being treated within a country?
These aren't a minority. They were the indigenous population that you created into a minority. This is the problem.
Right, but all kinds of things, bad things happen, including in 48. A few weeks ago, Ari Shavit was here talking about the LIDA chapter and how we did some horrible things, and so did everybody else, and so did superpowers, powers, and Palestinians.
We are where we are. Is that the argument?
No, the argument is we need to move on. That what gets us stuck is a feeling of victimization, which we both share, Israelis.
But you're concerned about Israel's presence in the occupied territories too, right?
Of course.
Do you not think it saps a little bit of Israel's soul every day the longer they're in those territories?
I totally agree with you.
So is there not some urgency for Israel not to lose its soul and get out of there?
I totally agree.
So
persuade my leaders that this is the case. But the problem, and here I will add another structural problem, it's that neither the Palestinians nor the Israelis are one solid group. It is the divisions within Israel and the divisions within Palestinians and Palestine that makes the conversation between the sides so difficult.
let me play a clip here, because we had University of California professor George Basharat on the program back in February. And, well, this is self-explanatory. Roll the clip, please. Do you think this is going to be resolved in your lifetime?
Yes, I think it will be resolved within 2 to 3 decades.
2 to 3 decades?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I agree.
Yeah, I don't think we're on the horizon of a solution. I think we have some decades of work to do and some struggle to do, but I do think it will be resolved in my lifetime.
Does that sound right to you? 2 to 3 more decades of this?
Yes. I mean, I'm hoping less, but I think he's right. And the reason I think he's right is because more and more Palestinians are now saying, we've tried this two-state solution gig. It's not working. The Israelis are not getting out. They're building more and more settlements. They're expanding day by day. Just since the end of July until the current day, there have been more than 10,500 housing units that have been worked on. So they're not leaving. They're not leaving. There's not going to be a two-state solution in any short period of time. And this is why more and more people are talking about one state and the fact that these people have got to live together.
2 or 3 more decades of this?
Well, first of all, referring to that professor from Berkeley, it depends really what he meant. He didn't say that, what he meant by a solution of because as you can see, people have different images of what the solution should be. Mm-hmm. I think we can start a process not to have peace. Probably it's right that it will take at least a generation, if not more, around the time that he was talking about, to have peace with each other. And then we can do all kinds of arrangements, confederations, federations, European Union, or even reunite in 30, 40 years. But, and here forgive me for being professorial, but there is a lot of, when you have something as deep a conflict than we had for 100 years, you first need to separate. You first need to separate, and then we need to get to a process of reconciliation.
So separate two states, then come together.
Then come together, perhaps, if we can, and we should try. But we first need to start. And what I'm saying, what will happen, in 30, 40 years, 2 generations, it's up for the two peoples, up for the region, the world.
I gave Deanna the first word, so Emmanuel, you get the last word.
Yes.
I think our viewers have some better understanding now of why these negotiations go on and on and on. There really are 2 different narratives and 2 different realities, and it's tough to get to that finish line. Emmanuel Adler, Professor of International Relations, University of Toronto, Deanna Butu, Canadian human rights lawyer, negotiated on behalf of the PLO. Thank you both for coming in and sharing your thoughts on this tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.